Nazis infiltrating the White House? That's so silly.
Hail Trump! Hail our people! Hail victory!
We're not gonna quit. Fight, fight, fight!
My name is Adolf. I'm on the mic. I'm gonna hip you to the story of the new Third Reich. It all began down in Munich town, and pretty soon the word started getting around. So I said to Martin Bormann, I said, hey Marty, why don't we throw a little Nazi party? So we had an old
Iron Sky is a 2012, relatively big budget, Finnish-German-Australian comedy film riffing on schlocky sci-fi with the premise of a secret Nazi lunar colony threatening modern-day America, very loosely based on one element from Robert A. Heinlein's 1947 novel Rocket Ship Galileo. It was directed by Timo Vuorensola, who previously directed a series of Star Trek spoofs, and is a member of an industrial band, a genre known for evoking a fascist aesthetic, and written by celebrated science fiction author Johanna Sinisalo, along with Michael Kalasniko, all of whom are both Finnish and white. As far as I can tell, none of them are Jewish or any group that was targeted by Nazis, besides generally being part of the region that Hitler wanted to conquer. Keep that in the back of your mind as I discuss this movie's portrayal of Nazis, America, and racial politics. In the tradition of Charlie Chaplin's 1940 film The Great Dictator, to which it pays homage, it attempts an anti-fascist message through spoof. It tosses in everything people associate with Nazis, even a blow-by-blow downfall meme recreation, and seemingly calls out the United States for its fascist tendencies through comparison to Nazi Germany in a manner similar to what would be done in 2014's Captain America: The Winter Soldier. In theory, I should like the film. I think that comedy is a great way to deal with the horrors of Nazism, lampooning the absurd qualities of fascism, demeaning the enemy, and connecting with human beings on a simplistic personal level in the face of extraordinary violence. I love To Be or Not to Be, Life is Beautiful, and Jojo Rabbit. This should be right up my alley. It should. Should. However, upon watching it, my main takeaway was...
That is one big pile of shit.
How do you screw up Nazis? This is the easiest political conflict out there. Nazis? Bad. Anything slightly to the left? Good. How hard is that? Despite being fundamentally anti-Nazi, and one would assume anti-racist, Iron Sky is shockingly racist itself. It feels like something from the actual 1930s. Film nerds would defend this movie by saying that we can't judge it by modern standards. After all, they didn't know any better. It's also fairly sexist against white women, but that's a lesser concern. One question I had after watching this was, did the production know what Nazis are? That sounds like a bizarre question. Obviously the film is about Nazis. They wear swastika armbands, talk about Hitler, and promote white supremacism. That said, they don't actually feel like Nazis so much as generic and sympathetic villains that are stuck in the Nazi role. I don't think that the production expected anyone to know anything about Nazis. The characters sure don't know anything about Nazis. They barely even recognize that Nazis exist. One drops a reference to Kristallnacht, and I honestly doubt anyone knew what that was. Anti-Semitism, the main thing that anyone should ever associate with Nazis, just isn't present in the plot. Has nothing to do with these Nazi characters, and certainly wasn't a concern when a Mengele-esque character was coded as a mad scientist by dressing him up like Einstein, a Jewish refugee from Nazi Germany. Yeah, that's right, the anti-Nazi film is anti-Semitic. The film's score is done by Leibach, an industrial band whose whole shtick is, are we Nazis or are we communists? You decide. Oh man, and you can't test them against Poland because both would try to invade it. Yeah, their involvement in this film, which is ostensibly a spoof of Nazism, is often cited as hard evidence that they're not Nazis. However, I could see a Nazi band looking at the film and thinking that it just looked like fun. After all, the Nazis aren't solidly condemned, are often framed as having a legitimate point taken too far, and some of the racial jokes look like things that actual racists would find amusing. Also, Nazism and Strasserism exist as combinations of Nazism and communism. I'm actually not entirely convinced that a bunch of Nazis didn't take over production to spread good PR in the guise of anti-fascism. It is that bad. Ilsa She-Wolf of the SS is a bad anti-fascist film, but I'm at least willing to settle on the judgment that the production sincerely tried. Iron Sky might literally be Nazi propaganda. It certainly is racist, right-wing content suffering from a serious case of the not funnies, in a way characteristic of most right-wing comedy. Without further ado, let's get into this mess, because all is not in order. The plot is instigated by a satirical American president figure, a blend of George W. Bush, Barack Obama, and Sarah Palin, a white woman referred to only as the president, played by New Zealand comedian Stephanie Paul. The film actually started production way back in 2006, in the middle of Bush's second term, and the president character was conceived of as a Bush parody. Production stretched on past that point, and the character was altered to remain topical. The president looks like Palin, has the personality of Bush, and uses a political slogan, "Yes, she can," in reference to Obama's "Yes, we can." Her riding hard on racial tokenism may also remind viewers of Obama, but that might be a coincidence as she's first and foremost a parody of Bush. The fact that she's what would have been America's first female president while being this absurd caricature of Bush and Obama and Palin is unfortunate. Though the Finnish writers may not have intended to be sexist, it crossed into an American culture war over the possibility of a female president of the United States. Palin was dragged in the media both for being conservative and for being a woman who thought that she could be president if it came to that. Leftist misogyny played a major role in the development of her popular caricature as a bimbo who should never hold a position of power. But I think that the Finnish creatives just absorbed the end result without the cultural context. They then merged this hypothetical example of why there shouldn't be a female president with a caricature of George W. Bush, an archetypal bad president, to create what appears to an American viewer like a misogynistic assertion that a female president is an inherently bad idea. I'm sure many Americans just nodded at that like, yup, that's why we need to keep women out of politics. The creative intention doesn't matter. It's a failure to understand the target market that results in a sexist message for that market. Faced with low approval ratings, the president executes a PR stunt to return to the moon. This time with a black guy, James Washington, played by Christopher Kirby, and to land on the far side instead. The stunt's slogan? Black to the moon. If this has you saying, is that supposed to be funny? Buckle in. It only gets worse from here. Yeah, the comedy in this film is truly horrendous. Stargate's Daniel sneezing and Godzilla's "That's a lot of fish" are better than the jokes in this movie. Hell, even Exit to Eden is funnier than this movie. The film's racism and general lack of effective comedy shows up immediately. Aside from a theme of cynicism in the depiction of American politics not really caring about promoting the interests of black people, the idea of a competent black astronaut is presented as inherently absurd. He's not even a real astronaut. He's a male model pretending to be an astronaut for good press. Apparently, the existence of black astronauts didn't make it to Finland. Now, something similar actually almost happened once, and may actually involve a Nazi conspiracy.
Gather round while I sing you of Werner von Braun, a man whose allegiance is ruled by expedience. Call him a Nazi, he won't even frown. Nazi schmatzi, says Werner von Braun.
In 1961, civil rights leader Whitney Young convinced the Kennedy administration to put a black man into space as a symbolic gesture of equality. Air Force test pilot Eric Dwight was selected, put into astronaut training, passed with flying colors, and was heavily promoted in the media before NASA racism barred the way for him becoming an astronaut. Knowing what we know now about Operation Paperclip, the US conspiracy to pardon literal Nazis and induct them into NASA to beat the Soviet Union in the space race, we might speculate about a white supremacist internal culture developing at NASA at the time. Almost 100 Nazis were placed there in 1959. It's not outlandish to speculate that the board members who disqualified Dwight had a sense of camaraderie for literal Nazis based around white supremacism, and came to view Dwight as inherently incompetent and unsuitable for the program because he was black. Every aspect of the story is serious. Whitney Young reaching out to the Kennedy administration, the administration selecting Dwight, Dwight training, NASA racism, and actual Nazis. These are all serious matters. In the right hands, they could be lambasted comedically, while still being respectful of the real black people really hurt by real racism. Spike Lee can make a film about this that makes you laugh, but also makes you think. However, Iron Sky just portrays the general concept as so absurd as to be a joke in itself. The thematic context of racism in America isn't respected, so it's not seen as a real concern to promote black people at NASA. The idea of black astronauts at all is shrugged at, like a racist Facebook meme, speculating about what would happen if a black man were hired to do a white man's job. So the appearance of a black astronaut at all is presented as a deception by a corrupt administration pretending that competent black men exist. Even the black male model figure is denied respect as a man who has the profession of a model and is made to undergo astronaut training. He isn't a himbo, an individually attractive but dim-witted man. He's a wacky black caricature, playing at being seen as a real serious figure, and this is supposed to be funny. It's such a racist depiction that it took me a long time to realize that this is all he is. There had to be some nuance, right? It couldn't be this nakedly racist in a movie that came out in 2012 about fighting Nazis. However, I came to understand that's exactly what they did. The film production really doesn't think that black men can be astronauts. They also don't think that white women can be astronauts either, but I'll get to that later. What is wrong with you, Finland? Okay, so here's the plot. In a pale facsimile of the respectable first moon landing with a white guy, America puts a fake black astronaut on the moon. The lunar module displays re-election banners depicting the president with her slogan, "Yes, she can," replacing a black man's success with that of a white woman. Yeah, even if they're telegraphing her being corrupt and cheesy, they're taking the tools of a powerful black man that they've erased from the picture to leave only this pathetic black man caricature with his exaggerated lack of competency. The filmmakers also seem to think that no one would take Washington seriously in his interactions with white women if they didn't knock them down a few pegs by exaggerating a bimbo characterization. This film's mortal sin is racism, but there's a fair amount of sexism that also gets dragged in its wake. Unfortunately for the crew, the place they've chosen to land was settled decades previous by a secret Nazi mission. The Nazis think that they're under attack, so they kill everyone except for Washington and bring him back to their giant swastika-shaped lunar colony for interrogation. They can't see through Washington's faceplate and assume that he's white until they get his helmet off. They're then shocked that the black people they've only read about by rough description could be capable enough to be astronauts. This could be an opportunity for an anti-racist message. It could. Something similar happened in real life with legendary jazz musician Sam Wooding. He brought his all-black jazz orchestra to Germany in 1925, and he educated a bunch of white people only familiar with black people by rough description about black history through an epic Broadway-style musical theater. He challenged the racist establishment, took some flack from racist critics, but changed some minds and inspired many Germans to embrace jazz culture. The German jazz scene then promoted interracial friendships and professional relationships, with white musicians working for black band leaders, and it ended up taking a firm stance against Nazism well into the Third Reich, even when that could get people arrested and killed. This literally happened. It's not some political spin. However, the film doesn't represent reality by accurately depicting what would realistically happen with a black American man using his talent, skill, and intelligence to challenge the racist preconceptions of an insular white German community. It instead applies its own political spin to reassure insecure white people that black men are just walking jokes. Washington isn't competent, and he's certainly not a real astronaut. And the only reason for that, as far as I can tell, is that he's black. Yeah. This came out in 2012. As far as I can tell, the only reason that a black guy was written into the script is to demonstrate Nazi racism, not as a main facet of their villain's evil, but as a contrivance to illustrate what the production probably considered to be a relatively minor aspect. It seems like what they thought the main aspects are include the dark swastika-heavy aesthetic, being conquerors of some sort, and generally being considered history's bad guys. Everything else is only trivia that they can drop to show that they did some manner of research. Hey, did you know that Nazis were obsessed with racial purity? That's something you can tell your friends so they think you're really smart. Jojo Rabbit doesn't depict any Jewish people until its second act, but anti-Semitism and racism is pervasive because Taika Waititi understands that this is the core of Nazism. Jojo's enthrallment in Nazi indoctrination is terrifying because we understand the weight of every salute, the way he practices heiling, the projection of Hitler as the Ubermensch imaginary friend, and his love of something so profoundly horrific. Iron Sky just captures the general SS aesthetic and portrays Nazis as the villains, but doesn't put any effort into displaying their horrific nature. Washington doesn't realize that they're Nazis until someone tells them later. Yeah, these guys, wearing swastikas and speaking German? He doesn't understand the significance of that. That is just bizarre. Nazis aren't an obscure bad guy. An American might not recognize the Pol Pot lunar colony, even if they have heard of him, but they're sure as hell recognizing the Nazi lunar colony. They've been in our movies since World War II. Part of it might be Finland not understanding America, and or the production not understanding Nazis, but the idea that black men aren't smart enough to figure it out probably also factors into it. He attempts to communicate with random German words, and we're supposed to laugh at how stupid he is. He, the black guy, pretending to be competent. The Nazis are presented as humorous for being confused, but the context negates any anti-racist theme, and might even make them sympathetic and seem like they have a point. And then he stupidly falls off a cliff while trying to escape, and only survives because of the reduced gravity. Today is the day you will always remember as the day you almost captured a random black guy. This, and an explosive decompression scene later on, is pretty much the only time the film takes advantage of its outrageous lunar setting. Otherwise, it might as well be set on some remote island. The Nazis haven't adapted much to their environment. Everything looks like it's set on Earth. Down to a motorcycle moving normally, with exhaust that doesn't do anything special, despite being in such a limited atmosphere. There isn't a lot of moon to the moon Nazis. Even the fall scene is weird, because it makes me wonder why the Nazis didn't design their facility around lunar conditions. If anything, it's not very German of them to not put in extensive safety precautions. That line comes close to actually parodying racism instead of making racism funny, an important distinction that the movie doesn't grasp. However, whatever subversive quality it has is negated by the surrounding framing of the racism itself being reasonable, and the black man funny for pretending at competency. Washington runs into Renate, an innocent Nazi school teacher played by German actress Julia Dietz, who would later be featured on a 2021 episode of The Daily Show as a wacky Hollywood anti-vaxxer.
What do you think of the COVID vaccine?
I don't think it's a vaccine. I think it's snapping the DNA in half. I think what's interesting, especially coming from Germany, I think history is repeating itself right now.
What are you saying? That what's
the vaccine mandates and everything. It's like it's turning into a police state.
And you're equating it to World War II era Germany.
Yes. Where's your papers? Where are your papers? It's very similar to the Hitler times.
But like Jewish people are fleeing Poland because they can't get into gyms?
It's not funny.
But is that comparison though?
You just didn't get the point, sorry. I'm good, bye.
Yes, clearly someone who understands the real problem with Nazism. Renate is an ingenue who also happens to be a Nazi woman. Sort of. To make her sympathetic, she is stripped of all agency and turned into a duped product of propagandization who thinks that the Nazi movement is a hippie thing and grew up completely isolated from any influence that could persuade her otherwise. This is a contrivance that's only possible in the wacky alternate universe scenario. An obvious point of comparison is with Jojo from Jojo Rabbit, who is forgivable despite being a Hitler fanboy, because you understand that he's young, impressionable, and doesn't have a full grasp on the situation. He's relatable enough just for being a young, bullied nerd that you could be willing to look past his deeply unhealthy hyperfixation until he becomes friends with a Jewish girl, falls for her, grows as a person, and kicks Hitler out of his life. He's also well written. On the other hand, Renate is more just a ditz. A silly woman who has a wrong conception of the world and says wacky things. Like that a heavily censored Great Dictator film shows that America was on board with the Nazis. She illustrates the moon Nazi culture as one of its facets, while not being respected as a legitimate actor within it. Her conception of Nazism is so wrong that, unlike JoJo, it feels wrong to even call her a Nazi per se. She doesn't want Nazi dominance, Lebensraum, or to attack subhumans threatening Aryan purity. She thinks that the swastika is a peace sign, and that Nazism is a pacifist movement. The writers so wanted a sympathetic Nazi that they shied away from what they saw as unsympathetic traits, and ended up just writing a confused hippie.
I don't want war. All I want is peace. A little piece of Poland, a little piece of France.
Upon running into Washington, Renate then becomes like an exotic foreign woman from an old adventure movie. He isn't really respected enough to assume the role of a male hero, but she is degraded enough that she falls into a sufficiently inferior position relative to him. A wacky action scene with an airlock opening, solely because Washington is too stupid to know that opening an airlock on the moon is dangerous, allows Washington to save her while her clothes fall off. This isn't just sexist. It illustrates rape culture and deriving sexual enjoyment from her degradation and lack of agency. See, if she were to make the conscious choice to be sexual, that would be seen as a character flaw. And we can't have that. She has to remain pure. The slut characterization would be seen in conflict with her role as an ingenue, so she is forced to be sexual by uncontrollable elements to retain her purity. And we so like purity. Ilsa's sexual displays are contrived, but at least they come with the sense that she chooses to be sexual. Renate has choice taken away from her, and her sexualization is closer to that of one of Ilsa's victims. The film essentially continues the theme of she-wolf and propping up the patriarchy by taking the sexy Nazi figure and tearing her down so much that she no longer has any of Ilsa's strength and is just a pathetic woman being batted around by stronger men. Renate's degradation opens her up to being Washington's love interest. The fact that an interracial romance is even on the table in what would have been a 2006 movie is fairly progressive. However, the film is hardly Guess Who's Coming to Dinner. The relationship is really just an opportunity for tired racial stereotypes about crude, brutish black men and sophisticated but weak and ignorant white women. Also, there's a hopscotch court in the shape of a swastika. Laugh, people, laugh. This is a joke. It's funny. Laugh. The Nazis catch them, and Washington is taken for medical examination by Renate's father, Dr. Richter, played by Thilo Bruckner. Americans would know him best for his role in The Neverending Story as Vush Vazul.
A kiss? No, he's a rock biter. A rock biter. A rock biter!
Yeah, that guy. This part should be horrific, You have a black guy suffering racial medical abuse by literal Nazis. But it's just played for laughs. The Nazis are goofy.
Wir sollten seinen Schädel öffnen und das Gehirn vermessen.
And he's goofy for reacting in weird ways. It feels racist for downplaying the severity of what's happening, and it's hard to imagine white audiences laughing at this unless they were also racist. To Be or Not to Be has a lot of goofiness around Nazis, with Jewish leads acting silly around them when pretending to be Nazis, and the Nazis themselves acting silly when they think they're alone with other Nazis. But it knows when to be serious. There is a constant tension from the threat of death. It's right there in the name, which comes from a Hitler quote. They either get out of their scrapes or they die. The comedy is fueled by the tension building in the background, so we welcome its release, but it can turn at any moment because we never forget what it means to have Nazis in the area. Life is Beautiful does something similar, where we laugh when the comedic lead lies to his son about what's happening, but hesitantly because we understand that it's a horrible situation, beaten back by everyone just agreeing to help the child with empathetic humor. I know that Life is Beautiful isn't everybody's cup of tea, Lindsay Ellis, but I think that it has integrity as an anti-fascist film that uses its gallows humor empathetically. But of course, your mileage may vary. What Iron Sky does is negate the horror and remove the tension by inserting comedy where it doesn't belong. Comedy horror can work, but they misunderstand the integration of the two elements, and the result was a lot more offensive than anyone probably realized. Add in the fact that they code a Mengele figure as a mad scientist by giving him Einstein hair, and it reads like Nazi humor. We're led to laugh at a horrific racist situation like we're all racist. Washington is just really stupid and doesn't understand anything about his situation, and Renate has to help him with the obvious suggestion to pretend to be a Nazi. Then she sneaks out, but oh my god. Nazi salutes a thumbs up. This is what passes for humor in this movie. Taking Renate's advice, he submits and pretends to fully accept the Nazi ideology. The Nazi in charge of him is main villain Klaus Adler, played by Götz Otto, who was in Downfall, an aspiring political leader who wants to romance Renate himself. Hearing Washington babble about knowing the president, he decides to take the now compliant Washington to Earth to make an alliance with the United States. To make Washington suitable for a mission with the Aryans, they, make him Aryan.
I have seen shit that'll turn you white.
The real-world Nazis did make the Japanese, quote-unquote, honorary Aryans, inducting them into their ranks as worthy allies, despite their racial makeup conflicting with Nazi ideology. The Moon Nazis could reasonably do this with Washington. It would reference history, and bring an opportunity for racial humor that pokes fun at the Nazis and their loose contrivances, instead of just mocking black people. Instead, they have Dr. Richter turn him white. Sort of. He just looks like a sick black guy or old man, but the plot framing indicates that he's now indistinguishable from a white guy. I guess they thought the audience would be confused if he actually passed. And it's used to degrade him for laughs instead of bolstering his character. Forget Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, this isn't even white chicks. The weirdest part is, he doesn't notice. After 40 years of working on a siege ship shaped like a flying saucer, Dr. Richter is finally able to make it fly with the addition of a cell phone that Washington brought with him. He's somehow able to connect the cell phone to the Nazi spaceship, and the computer makes it run for a moment before it shorts out. Now they just need another cell phone. The flying saucer alludes to UFO conspiracy theories about Nazis being behind UFO sightings, having secret superior technology, while hidden away in a colony somewhere. It's probably a misinterpretation of shots of the SAC AS-6, a saucer-shaped Nazi plane concept developed by a farmer who didn't understand aeronautics, and that literally never got off the ground. In case you're wondering, no, Die Glocke, an alleged Nazi anti-gravity device, does not make an appearance. I think it wasn't old enough as a concept to be relevant when the film was put together. Adler, Renate, and Washington get into the flying saucer and go to Earth, ostensibly to acquire more cell phones. The Adler has landed. Where's Will Smith when you need him?
Welcome to Earth.
Now it's time for the part of the movie where the wacky characters of the adventure world interact with the familiar world, and expose lesser discussed natures of both elements in a series of funny interactions, like in Crocodile Dundee or Star Trek IV. That's not a weird allusion to Nazism. That's a weird allusion to Nazism. I mean, that's what it should be. In reality, the writers have no idea what they're doing and totally botch this part. First, they're attacked by a farmer woman upset that the flying saucer landed in her field. A Nazi red shirt, or is that a brown shirt, bites it, and the main characters run away. What are they, Italian fascists? Yeah, the Nazis can't handle combat and run away. Now, you could make a joke about how the Nazi military capabilities have been exaggerated, and the neo-Nazis played defense more than they'd like to admit with those big shields. So there's some room to depict them as cowards who only pretend to be capable fighters, but that joke isn't there. The Nazis retreating is surreal instead of making a point. Then they go to New York City, and things get stranger. The Nazis dress like Nazis, jackets and swastikas completely visible. They then walk around in downtown New York, dressed like punch bait, and no one cares. It's the easiest lead into a conflict imaginable, and the writers completely fail to take advantage of it. Die Hard 3 literally has a bad guy try to get the hero killed by sticking him in the street in downtown New York, wearing a sandwich board, declaring racial hatred. It gets the plot rolling right away, with extreme tension, as black gangsters threaten to kill him, and the black co-star tries to save him to prevent a wave of police aggression targeting his neighborhood. Sending 3 ostensibly white people through downtown New York, dressed as Nazis, is a recipe for a lot of violence happening very quickly, and nothing happens. Yeah, this is one of the reasons I question how much the production knew what Nazis are. They don't seem to understand how big a threat Americans, especially Americans of color, find these guys. Even when the film does eventually feature skinheads, they're ultimately just kind of rude and unpleasant to be around. The sheer tension associated with Nazism and the swastika symbol is so profound that the only good reason to feature them is conflict and horror. The film almost entirely discounts their significance as Nazis. The only real conflict they get into revolves entirely around Washington and his Aryanization. Adler wants to use his gun and rob these black guys of their van, but Washington's like, no, I'm a black guy, I can talk to them and explain to them why we need the van, and this presumably would work. Except that he's seen as white, so when they try to take the van, the black guys immediately turn violent. I am absolutely serious here. The film reads like Nazi humor about black people being subhuman. I'll stress, no one cares that he looks like a Nazi. This is what the filmmakers think black people are like. You can find this stuff on the image boards and other places that Nazis frequent. Regardless of if the filmmakers consider themselves Nazis, they could take a scene from this movie and put it on one of the image boards and get a good reception from actual Nazis. Just saying. Adler has to save Washington, and they have a really stupid little fight over the Aryanization procedure, instead of the serious treatment that the subject deserves. This should be the basis for serious conflict over racial politics, self-image, the death of the self, contrasted with silly hijinks, not treated as one. There is room to use this kind of thing for humor, but you have to ground it in empathy. That is the basis of comedy. Washington leads them to a white woman, Vivian Wagner. Get it? It would be pronounced Vivian Wagner in German. Get it? It's funny. Played by Australian actress Peta Sargent, who is an advisor to the president, kind of like Goebbels, as a hot lady. Salvador Dali would be into her. The character was previously compared to Hitler with a downfall meme playing out in the film, and one of the reasons why she is considered so Hitler-like is that she's a woman with power and aggressive tendencies, assuming a traditionally male position and making her subordinates confused whether or not to call her sir or ma'am. That's right, we're in feminazi territory. Mocking strong women straight out of My 5 Wives. The characterization of androgyny, despite contrasting traditional femininity and sexualization, makes her heir to the legacy of Ilsa. Now having an actual Aryan to help them, Adler kicks Washington out and continues with Wagner. Adler takes Wagner prisoner and lets her wear herself out before calling over Renate to preach Nazism to her. This scene, which focuses on a tied-up and gagged woman struggling in her bonds, has a visual effect applied to it to make the details of her face stand out in sharp focus. It gives the scene an air of misogynistic pornography, leading male viewers to get off on the strong woman being taken down a few pegs. Again, like Elsa. Though Wagner initially scoffs at Renate's brainwashing, she soon recognizes its utility for nationalistic propaganda, becomes attracted to the brainwashing itself, and essentially becomes a fascist. She takes them, decked out in their sexiest Nazi outfits, to the president as examples of her bold new fascist strategy. These sexy Nazi outfits have white-striped Hitler Youth armbands. You can see these being showcased in Jojo Rabbit. I'm fairly certain they're supposed to be regional leader armbands, with gold rope pattern stripes. Nice research, guys. The president hires Adler and Renate to write her speeches and becomes a fascist herself. Yeah, this is an opportunity for political commentary, but everyone just kind of shrugs as literal Nazis take control of the United States. That did not age well. I'm fairly confident that this was intended as loose commentary on Bush, but it isn't pushed nearly hard enough. It doesn't call out America for acting fascist. It's just a wacky plot point in a wacky movie. As much as an issue as there is with Captain America the Winter Soldier, foisting America's problems off on Nazis, it at least overtly calls out America for accepting Nazi-like ideology because it became fascist, drawing a parallel with real-world American corruption and the corruption of Weimar Germany that allowed the Nazis to take over. Washington does not resume his old life, for really no good reason. Yeah, he looks different, but he could still work to prove his identity. He could claim to have vitiligo like Michael Jackson, or say that he had a thing done to him that was the opposite of the black like me treatment. Even if he wants to leave the moon Nazis out of it. Except he doesn't want to leave the moon Nazis out of it. He becomes a homeless guy looking like an archetypal crazy guy for yelling about moon Nazis. Great, we can add classism and ableism to the list of ways that this film resembles actual Nazism. Renate runs into him on the street, still dressed like a Nazi, still not attracting attention, and greets him like they're old friends. Washington, who does not see it that way, grabs her to prove to people that moon Nazis are here. She fights him off, the cops arrest them both, and there's a scene based on calling attention to the absurd premise when they're being questioned. It works well enough, but isn't nearly as funny as Get Out's take on this kind of scene. Plus, Iron Sky caps it off with a sexist and transphobic joke.
And you are Neil Armstrong after the sex change operation, is that correct?
Transphobia. Yes, that's another way this film resembles actual Nazism. The main joke here, though, positions Renate as equivalent to Washington in the film's unspoken assumption that only white men are legitimate astronauts. The cop can't even conceive of the existence of female astronauts, and thinks that the only way Renate could have been an astronaut on the moon, during a time when a recent mission to the moon was widely talked about, is if a celebrated male astronaut transitioned. That is the only way this joke makes sense. Yeah, what is up, Finland? As for the transphobia, it functions based on the idea that trans people are absurd, that even mentioning them would be funny, and that it would be a huge insult for a cis woman to be mistaken for a trans woman, because trans women are supposed to be inherently ugly, immoral, dare I say, degenerate. Nazis, of course, viewed them as such. During the Holocaust, Nazis subjected trans women and gay men to such horrific abuses that there's some controversy if it was worse than how they treated Jewish prisoners, providing, of course, that they weren't immediately killed. The Broadway play Bent has a plot point where a gay protagonist pretends to be Jewish in the hope of getting better treatment than he otherwise would, and it's left ambiguous if he was right or not. Making a mockery of trans women and portraying them as degenerate is a Nazi-like action in the supposedly anti-Nazi movie. The police ultimately let them go, and Renate tries to make friends with Washington by taking him to see a showing of The Great Dictator. You know, in the theater. The film came out in 1940, but it's playing in the 2010s for reasons. 2 hours later, she comes out realizing that the film she saw was heavily edited and that Americans actually weren't on board with the Nazi regime, which is an unnuanced take, considering that the German-American Bund was drumming up Nazi sympathies in the US. Until Hitler actually declared war, America was very much on board with not pissing him off. There are better ways to oppose Nazism than citing historical American opposition. She sees 4 neo-Nazis loitering nearby and goes over to show Washington that they're good boys. But they display their evil Nazi rudeness. They're just kind of rude. They're mean to her. They make sexual comments. What a bunch of jerks.
Nice rat. Even Hitler would get a hot on.
Who's this guy, the Joker? Their neo-Nazi regalia is all over the place. There's a return of the Hitler Youth armband, along with a Stormfront patch, an Imperial Eagle, a Stormfront t-shirt, and a Combat 18 t-shirt. Combat 18 is a neo-Nazi terrorist organization that pretty much only operates in Britain and Ireland. As in, not terribly appropriate to see in New York. They seem too dumb to draw swastikas correctly. Laugh, people, laugh. The neo-Nazis attack Washington for being homeless, and Renate saves him. She's forced to admit that maybe Nazis are, in fact, baddies. But, not for any good reason. Neo-Nazis being rude and willing to attack homeless people isn't the problem at hand. Actual Nazi ideology is never acknowledged and therefore is never challenged. There's a subplot with a new Nazi supreme leader who replaced Hitler, Wolfgang Kurzfleisch, played by a prolific German actor Udo Kier. The Nazi subordinates keep forgetting to heil him, and Adler thinks that he has a shot at replacing him. Kurzfleisch gets suspicious and takes his own saucer to Earth. He interrupts Adler as he seduces Wagner. A Nazi takes Wagner away, and we hear a shot fired and assume that she's dead. However, when Renate shows up to confront Adler about the Nazis being the baddies, and Kurzfleisch threatens to kill her, Wagner pops back out and sprays bullets in Kurzfleisch's direction, apparently killing him instead, and letting Adler take over the Moonreich. He tries to kill Renate in Washington, but they get away. Just when you thought this film could have a feminist moment, Wagner reveals that she asked for a last blowjob and then shot her assassin instead. It could be framed empathetically, but is instead grossly framed as sexy despite having the element of force. As a villain, she's allowed more leniency in her sexuality than Renate, allowed a slutty characterization because she's already morally impure, but there's still an element of forceful sexualization, apparently just there because the director found it hot. Gross.
You write all women as either unknowable Hitchcock bitches or Michael Bay fuck dolls. I mean, I get that a lifetime of jerking off to Transformers didn't exactly make you popular with the ladies, but a little effort would be nice. You know what I'm saying?
Adler then kisses and abandons her as he leaves to conquer Earth. There's a joke with some former Kurzfleisch minions reading an American porn magazine and getting confused about women shaving their crotches. They aren't into the infantilization look, but are into landing strips because it makes them think of Hitler's mustache. I think this might be the one feminist element that Sinisalo managed to insert into the film, but it still doesn't quite hit the mark. It's not really funny or pointed, just kind of surreal. Also, I was watching this film with my father, and this is the point that he bailed. Just too weird for him. Turns out, Kurzfleisch is still alive, just so Adler can kill him himself. See, the sexy woman can't be effective. Only the man can have the dramatic moment. Adler takes Kurzfleisch's flying saucer up to a rocket Zeppelin fleet, sitting in low orbit, somehow remaining undetected, and leads them to invade the Earth by deploying thousands of flying saucers. Cue the Independence Day homage. Points for a solid action scene in an otherwise dumb, stupid, disappointing work. There's an emergency UN meeting to discuss the invasion. North Korea takes credit, even though it's clearly not them, and everyone blames the Indian delegate because he has a Hindu swastika ring. These are probably the best jokes that the movie has to offer. I'll let that speak for itself. The president reveals that she has a secret battle spaceship, the George W. Bush, run by Wagner because she does everything. Yeah, she's Rommel now for some reason. They single-handedly take on the Nazis while blasting Ride of the Valkyries, which, to be fair, is a banger. However, the president can't just have America save the day like in American action movies, because it turns out that several other countries also have their own battle spaceships ready to fight the moon Nazis. This comes close to being an effective joke, but I feel like they forgot to make it. They just included the raw elements. Adler takes a tablet PC to be the power source of a Nazi mothership, the Götterdämmerung, another Wagner reference, which is a giant flying saucer, and he intends to use it to wipe out the Earth fleet. Renate begs Washington to help her fix things, and they play the role of Jeff Goldblum and Will Smith in Independence Day to fly the original flying saucer to the Götterdämmerung. They consult a map, which is supposed to be a joke, admit that they have feelings for each other, and run off in separate directions to sabotage the ship. Washington attacks Dr. Richter just as he's making a pathetic excuse for a joke, but he's too late to stop Adler from activating the engines. He makes a badass stunt, blasting through the moon's surface to bear down on the fleet.
You sure must have the smallest dick in the universe.
Size is not everything, Commandant.
Adler shoots the moon so the debris hits the fleet. Renate tries to get past guards to attack Adler, and she succeeds with a gag that is both unfunny and borderline incomprehensible. There's an in case of fire, break glass case, but it houses a switch to play the national anthem in case of a need for motivation. Nazis are obsessed with ritual, don't you know? So everyone stops what they're doing to salute and sing. This allows Renate to sneak by the guards and Washington to defeat Dr. Richter. When did this turn into a Bugs Bunny cartoon? Renate fights Adler and tricks him into saluting into an electrical socket and stabs him in the head with her stiletto boot. The one time a woman can be effective in this movie, it's through unfunny comedy that completely negates the dramatic impact. Washington pulls out the tablet, and he and Renate eject in escape pods. The ship crashes on the moon. The day is saved, until the UN learns that the moon Nazis were mining helium-3 and have huge stores of it. The president claims it as American property. Everyone angrily objects. World War III breaks out with a silly fight in the UN. During this, someone throws a shoe at the president, in allusion to the time an Iraqi journalist threw his shoes at George W. Bush to call him dirty. Yeah, that incident resulted in the man being severely beaten and sentenced to 3 years in prison for embarrassing the president. But sure, it was silly. Let's laugh. Renate resumes her role as teacher and teaches the moon Nazis that, actually, Nazis are baddies. Washington finds a cure for his Aryanization off-screen and kisses Renate in front of her students, who are confused but not super racist because, the movie's over. As the movie comes to a close, we have racially progressive moon ex-Nazis, while nuclear war erupts on Earth. And so, Iron Sky concludes. I really hate this movie. I hate it worse than Morbius, Monos, The Hands of Fate, the original Ilsa, She-Wolf of the SS. There are a lot of really bad movies I've seen. This one takes the Nazi cake. Iron Sky fundamentally lacks integrity as a purportedly anti-Nazi work. It pays homage to the idea of racial progressivism with an interracial romance and poking fun at racial purity dynamics, but it fails to respect its characters due to general racism and misogyny. It really feels like it could be a pro-Nazi film, and even if it wasn't intended to be such, the fact that it could be interpreted as such points at such a colossal failure, like holy crap. And to cap it off, despite bombing harder than Dresden, they made a sequel. Hitler Rides a Dinosaur. Loosely based off of Vril, The Power of the Coming Race. An early science fiction story that was basically like the modern Matrix in the sense that it had nothing to do with a far-right sentiment, but was appropriated by far-right parties to use a central plot device as a symbol of basically racism. You know, misogynists say get red-pilled, Nazis say vril, and use it to mean something about powering the white race. It is very stupid. Also, there was an asylum knockoff of the first Iron Sky, Nazis at the Center of the Earth. I haven't seen it, but I'm told it's better than the actual Iron Sky. There are good Nazi-themed comedies. Jojo Rabbit is brilliant. Iron Sky is hot garbage. It's racist, sexist, anti-Semitic, transphobic, and, like all conservative comedy, just isn't funny. To hell with this film. Let it burn like Ilsa's camp.
Good to see